another review of the history of ICS. We ought to really sort of release some ribbons of things, but congratulations to our Vice Chairperson, Sreemati, putting this together. She'll explain in a minute what she had in mind, how it came about, and the challenges ahead. As you probably know, ICS has a section for comparative India-China studies. We've made this, as it were, one of our themes or thematics. But it's been an up and down and bumpy road in comparative humanities, social science, comparative studies. One of the reasons is because doing comparative studies is often not easy. There are all sorts of tricky methodological problems in comparing even countries which are in many ways so similar as India and China, and countries which are quite dissimilar. As an anthropologist or sociologist, this is something that has worried many of us and on which there is a huge amount of writing as to how you go about doing comparative studies. Now, in this case, one of the ways in which an enterprise can be put together is to study country A and then study country B, and then, as it were, juxtapose them. And the other thing is to tackle both at once in one breath, which is one step harder. Now, in this volume, we have both things going on. We have papers about higher education in China, we have papers about higher education in India, and we have a very brave gentleman sitting here, Professor Balatchandirane, whom many of you know from the Department of East Asian Studies at DU, who have tried to actually make the comparison. So the comparison can be by juxtaposition or by finding an argument around it. Within the comparative studies project that we had, we always intended to focus on particularly social sector issues, but also questions like environment and so on, and on health and education in particular. Now, thanks to Madhurima and Ramabaru, our comparative focus on health has been extremely fruitful. Our efforts at looking comparatively at education have been up and down, but Sreemati has pursued a lonely course of this for quite a few years now. I remember, I don't know how many years ago whether you're going to mention this, but you looked at the compulsory education legislation in India and China, and how that is in law and how it is in practice, and what difference, if any, it has made. Within these themes, we've been particularly looking at inclusion or exclusion, and questions of equity, of access to health on the one hand, to education on the other, at its different levels. This particular book is very contemporary in its work. In fact, it was for its time, given that these seminar on which it was 3 years ago. It had already picked up the problem which is staring us in the face in India today, all of those who are educationists at least, is the relationship of privatization, globalization, and state control, state education. It's called some places public education, but in India is used for the private education. Very confusing. This was a very forward-looking theme, because I think that I might say something at the end of this, but every day that goes by shows the contrary poles of the private sector and its priorities, and the state control increasing in certain aspects. So we've all felt the effects of that in our almost all the people here, as students, as teachers, and we are at a tipping point which, whether it's India or China, it deserves very serious reflection, particularly from the point of view of equity and access to the goods of this world. So without further ado, I'll invite Sreemati first to explain the book. I might say Professor Mahanti has a very clear foreword to this, which I think is extremely worth reading. And Sreemati will explain how this came about, and two of the contributors here will have 10 or 15 minutes each. So there we go.
Thank you. Well, as she mentioned, this book has come out in a conference that we had in February 2015. Our aim was to bring the book out in 2016, by late 2016, but for reasons most of you understand, delays and everything, so we could bring it out on time. And as the editor of this volume, I shouldn't be saying anything negative, but then I just cannot stop myself from saying that this is named Select Perspectives, because we don't have an overall perspective. We did not get that many papers. Some people will ask me back. We don't have a chapter on, say, equity issues, really. Okay, how the SCs, STs in India, what are they getting from the education system? Then and also minorities in China. That would have been a very good addition to the book. Nothing on gender. So these are the two shortcomings that the book has. Before anybody else points them out, I thought to mention. Anyway,
so being too modest.
No,
yeah.
Obvious. Anyway, so well, what I'll do is, since most of the speakers are unable to attend, they of course send their regrets, I will just summarize very briefly, each of the chapters, and then for two of the chapters we have the chapter writers here, so they will make their elaborate presentations. So, and before this, let me say I'm grateful to Prof. Sreemati and to Balatchandirane for encouraging this endeavor, and also to the publisher who probably is not here. He may come late, Mr. Saxena, who sort of was very helpful. Anyway, with the early 1990s, globalization and liberalization, very remarkable changes in India and China were visible in the higher education scenario. Now, economic globalization and the need for a knowledge economy were the two driving forces which brought about the reorientation of higher education systems and institutions the world over, and of course in India and China also. Now, this transitional process was guided by four factors. One was expansion. Large numbers of students started joining universities, large number of students passing out from high school. And this expansion in both the countries started sometime from the mid-1990s. And the structure and essence of governance has also changed in both the countries, some form or the other. And then privatization is viewed as the best solution to meet the growing demand, but it is also very seriously contested. Then creation of world-class universities to meet the challenges of higher education, high quality education, again has been a very important driving force. Okay, now, the first chapter written by colleagues from China, Sheyuan Lo and Kavin Chow, that was supposed to be the keynote address at the conference, but it was still the keynote address, but it had to be read out by Al-Qajar. Okay, according to this article, this chapter, in Chinese higher education development in the post-Cultural Revolution period, there are four phases. First is 1978 to 1985, where the state gave a healing touch to higher education. because the cultural revolution had played havoc with it, and so it was a period of rebuilding higher education. The next stage is 1985 to 1998, which they call recovery and reconstruction, when things consolidate and a lot of improvements in higher education come about. Okay. Then the third phase is 1998 to 2010, which he calls the period of rapid expansion, when quantity is stressed upon, quantity. Okay. More courses, more students, more universities. And then the final phase, which is from 2010 to the present, where quality is stressed. Remember, from 2010 onwards, we noticed Chinese universities coming in the top 100, top 500 lists. So the stress is then on quality, from quality. Now, the problems, of course, China's problems were, very obvious. Graduate employment is an issue. They don't say unemployment, which means university graduates don't get the kind of jobs that they expect to. Then there is uneven development across regions, across within provinces, and all high school graduates do not get into universities. These are some of the problems she flags. Okay. The next chapter is by Kavita Sharma, who says that the state's inability to, it's on private higher education in India and China, she says the state's inability to expand the higher education sector led to privatization. However, in both India and China, job-oriented subjects are taught in private institutions. Okay. Job-oriented subjects, engineering, computer science, law, management, so forth. Okay. But contradictions have emerged. There are no clear-cut policies in either of the two countries concerning higher education. Okay. And the governments seem to, sometimes lose their priorities, and also, we see a paradox there. On the one hand, the governments wanting to promote, in both the countries, want to promote higher education, and on the other, they want to control higher education institutions. The next one is my chapter on internationalization of higher education. Now, earlier, internationalization meant basically exchange of students, exchange of faculty, and transfer of knowledge. But now it involves many other things. It is multifaceted, and it also has to do with projection of soft power of states, of nations, like Confucius Institutes is one example. And also there are commercial and political considerations. In fact, many Western universities are opening campuses in China so that they can sustain their home university. Right? So there are major, commercial and economic considerations. And some of them have been successful, some not. But anyway, the process is on. In China, massive push to internationalization since the 1990s, to reach world standards is very, very visible. And in China, not only the increase in the number of students and faculty exchanges, but also in terms of new courses and new areas of research. Almost all universities, in the last 20-30 years have added, new areas of research, new courses, new departments. And my personal experience with internationalization, something I can convey to you, the kind of, I was there for 1 month in Wuhan at the Central China Normal University. I was visiting faculty there, and it's not one of China's best universities either. But the facilities that I got and I saw other people getting is really, really remarkable. Nothing close to that we can offer to the state. It was, quite an eye-opener. I knew that, they told me that you'll get accommodation, you'll get this, that, this facility, that facility. But only after going there, I realized how much, what efforts they are making to make internationalization a reality, getting foreign faculty for their universities. Okay, Professor Yang Rui, who's a big name in the area of Chinese higher education, wrote this chapter called Hitting the Glass Ceiling. Right? That's what it's called.
Yeah.
Hitting a Glass Ceiling, question mark, a preliminary assessment of China's higher education development. Now, he says that in Chinese culture, institutions of higher learning have always had political utility and as defined by the ruling class as its central focus. Whereas in Western style universities, you have the essence is academic freedom and financial autonomy. So he says these two things are absent in China. In the absence of these two things, Chinese higher education in China will only achieve limited success because Chinese culture, is different and constant tension. Basically, he wants to say is that the hold of the Communist Party is so strong in all universities that real autonomy, real academic freedom you don't get. Similarly, government is withdrawing from funding. Many universities, faculty members are expected to raise funds. I myself, was quite surprised when in October last year September last year gone to Beijing, and I met a few faculty members for my research. In their informal conversation, they said almost everybody is expected to raise funds for the university, and their promotions, if all associate professors will be promoted to full professors, depending on how much, of course, their academic qualifications are also, credentials are important, how much funds they have brought for their university. Now, this is a constant pressure on academics in China, in the universities. Okay, Ritu Agarwal, who again, expressed her regret for not being able to come, works on Yunnan. Her chapter on China's ethnic minorities. Her chapter is called Ethnic Minorities, Integrative Nationalism and Higher Education in Yunnan Province. Now, she points out that despite quotas for ethnic minority students, the percentage of enrolled students, minority students in China's central universities is very low. The quotas don't get filled. And in case of Yunnan province, she shows that the state, from being assimilated, has now become accommodative towards students. Earlier, they would insist on students, definitely, preferring, say, courses which are given in the Han language, as something that, they made it mandatory that most of the courses they have to do in Han Chinese. But later on, they have become accommodative. Now, other languages are allowed. Okay, and the state is on the one hand trying to make them adapt to the mainstream culture and education, and on the other is encouraging to keep their cultural differences intact. So the state is trying both, and so at times there is confusion and there are problems in these universities. Okay, for the minority students, especially in Yunnan and other places. Anamika's chapter actually would go very well under internationalization. She talks about, it's a case study of an institute, a Swedish institute, which began a human rights course in Beijing University. Now before that, Sweden along, that's why I thought this was interesting. Sweden along with the European Union, had began a long-term dialogue process with China. And there they stressed that, the need for human rights education. And so the human rights discourse was clearly spelled out in these meetings, and the Chinese agreed to have this institute. This is called the Raoul something. What's the full name? Raoul Human Rights Institute. Okay. Right, something like that. And they had began a master's program in Beijing University. And in the course they were focusing mainly on legal aspects of international human rights, but that does not give, as Anamika points out, does not give an opportunity to the students to connect with international human rights with the social, cultural and local conditions, local realities that exist in China. So that is a bit of an issue. But the program has the potential to create human rights awareness, but whether it can lead to an institutionalization of a human rights culture is questionable. So, and the program has limited reach and outcome, but all those who have benefited from the program have given a positive assessment of it. So it's a good beginning according to her, and then with the hope that it will sort of percolate and disseminate. Okay, that's all for the chapters. I think I will stop here, and when we have two people to speak or give an elaborate assessment of their chapters. So,
okay, I'll ask Professor Balatchandirane first. The subtitle of this is not he is doing a comparison of higher education in India and China, and his subtitle is very significant: Game Changer or Opportunity Lost? Question mark. So, for both countries, yes, I presume so. Or are you saying game changer for one and opportunity lost for the other? Okay, so
Oh, yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I'll try to not condense what I have written, but I'll try to raise some points and maybe we can discuss. So I'll selectively use the slides also. So what I am trying to do here is, in this particular chapter, is to look at what is known as the knowledge-driven economy. I'm looking from the knowledge-driven economy from the perspective of China and India. And what are the things that are important when we talk about the knowledge economy? So we know that two things are essential. One is advanced research, and the second is higher education. That much we know. Now, we start with these, then we take into account the process of globalization, which is intensifying now. We take into account factors like the demographic dividend, which is on in both these two countries, and then try to look at the issues that come up. So when you talk about the knowledge economy, how do you define it? The OECD definition would be that when an economy is involved in the production, diffusion and use of technology and information, and these become key to the economic activity and sustainable growth, it is a knowledge economy. So the basic idea is that in domination and trade, if an economy is involving more and more into this, it is becoming a knowledge economy. Now the core of the economic activity would be defined by the production and consumption of knowledge. Now with that, let's see. Innovation in this perspective is critical. So when you're talking about knowledge being the prime driver of economic growth, the primary role of human capital and technology becomes extremely important. By human capital, we understand the investments in education, in training, etc. That is human capital. So innovation obviously is quite critical when we talk about this. Then we turn to the role of higher education. So three primary roles can be looked at. The first would be creation of labor force. Now we are not talking about creating just labor force, we are talking about the creation of knowledge workers. Obviously generating new knowledge and then accessing and adapting global knowledge. These things become important. Now these figures will give you an idea of what is called as GERD. GERD is nothing but gross domestic expenditure on research and development. This takes into account four sectors. The first is business, second is university, third is government, and fourth is non-profit organizations. Once you sum up their spending on R&D, you get these figures. As you can see, US is predominant. It's about 31.1% for 2014. China is about 17.5%, and the important thing is that Chinese figures have been rising over the years. 15%, 15.3 to 16.5 to 17.5. When you look at India, we have been static, 2.7%. So our spending is much less compared to Chinese, and we have been stagnant. Okay. Chinese
Is in the academic sector or the private sector as well?
Includes the private sector. Business, I said fourth. Business, university, government, and non-profit. All put together. So if you're looking at just the government, I'll come. So then this is absolute figures in the last column if you look at. The R&D figures, the one column before that gives you the percentage figures. For China, it's about 2% spending on R&D. Okay, we are less than 1%. If you come down, India is at the 8th position. So in terms of sheer total amount, which is US first, China second, India's rank is 8th. Okay, in R&D. This is more or less what people have. So I think this is the important thing to look at. But this captures what is a knowledge economy. The size of the bubble shows the total spending R&D as a percentage of gross domestic product. The bottom line says that, and on the vertical axis you have the total scientists and engineers per million people. If you observe, this is more or less a diagonal, and this shows that there is a close relationship between the two variables. Now, the size of India and the size of South Korea, for example, are more or less the same. But South Korea is much ahead of India in terms of total number of scientists and engineers per million population. Obviously, it is much ahead of India. If you look at China and US is, of course, the size is a little larger, but China is lagging much behind. The primary reason for this is a snapshot view. This is for one particular time period, okay, just an instant in time. Whereas what matters is the cumulative investments over the years. If you notice South Korea and India started at more or less the same economic level from 1955, 55 to 60. Many economic indicators, we were just about the same. The major difference comes when the South Koreans started investing heavily in education, which was primary education, not higher education at that point. That investment is paying off, and that is what has moved about. Okay? Even if in terms of total absolute amount, they are spending the same, and we are not far behind Japan also. Japan has been investing for over a century. So that matters. So it takes time. So the cumulative investment is probably extremely important. So we are talking about, the linkage is easy to see. If you are talking about where a country is placed in terms of innovation, we will come to the innovation index later. The past investment becomes extremely critical. So, despite our talk of investing 6% in education, we never ever came here. We touched 4% once. Otherwise, ours has been consistently close to 3%. So 6% is an absolute minimum. And when you're talking about higher education, China is spending around 0.5%, and we are spending even less than that. Okay. So the spending is absolutely insufficient, whichever way you look at it. But here you get to see the R&D figures once again. India is less than 1%, China is close to 2%, US is much more, South Korea is close to 4%. And that translates into the kind of patents they file and other indicators. See, this global innovation index probably becomes relevant in this context. This takes a huge number of metrics. I think it's about 84 indicators that are taken into account before you arrive at this. The significant thing here is that I think a total of 184 countries or so are involved in this. This started in 2007. The thing which strikes us immediately is that we have been completely slipping. From 2007, our ranking has been coming down. In the case of China, it started at 29, it slipped, but now it is back to 29. It is expected to reach 25 next year or so. So the top 25 countries in terms of global innovation index are the ones which are developed. All the developed world comes inside the top 25. Okay. China is at the moment is 29, and probably they will improve. This is about 2014, and they are expected to reach the 25th rank very soon. When you look at the higher education, is nothing but a specialized form of human capital. It supplies knowledge workers, it is important for creation of knowledge, it facilitates globalization. The most important thing is this. This is a very interesting study of development. Over the years,
Can you hear that there?
Is it audible?
Yeah.
Yes, good.
So,
Absolutely.
he took a number of countries and analyzed and found the GR, the enrollment ratios in higher education. And he found out that no country in the world has become advanced without raising the GER to 30%. There is absolutely no country in the
How
world.
many GRU?
The enrollment rate in higher education. It has to be more than 30%. Right. It's basically how many move from primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary, right?
30%.
Secondary to tertiary, how much move? That percentage has to be minimum 30%. That is what he found when he analyzed a large number of countries. Okay. Now, once you reach 30%, it doesn't mean that you are going to become an advanced nation. But without reaching that 30%, you are never ever going to be 60%. So, India has just crossed 20% now. Maybe we are 20 point or something. Figures. China has touched 30% 2 years ago. Okay. So, that doesn't make China a candidate to be called as an advanced nation, but it has cleared important right. I think this I'm going to skip. This is mostly descriptive, and I request you to look at the book. I want to raise some issues. I think we skip. All these are which one can easily besides skip. All right. So this is a link between globalization. So globalization basically facilitates the movement of goods, services, capital. People and ideas also. That I think is critical when we discuss globalization. It is people and ideas. It is human capital that finds it easy to cross borders. So now, with the rise of globalization, we find that simultaneously we also find the strong rise of knowledge economy. So it matters. Knowledge economy is dependent on knowledge workers, high level of human capital, and with borders opening up, this promises huge amount of opportunities to the developing world. The role of universities obviously becomes very important. The one aspect that I want to point out is the way the state has been abdicating its role. I mean, call it as the abdication of the state's role in provisioning the basic things like health and education to the population. I confine myself to education only here. If you look at the East Asian case, for example, the Japanese case, the role of the state is extremely critical in the last 1 century. When you talk about the build-up of human capital in Japan, when you talk about Japan, the miracle in Japan in the mid-60s, 1960s, you have to start with a major estimation. You have to look at how the state was investing in education, how the state was pushing, it was using the danda to send students to school, starting from 1880 onwards. That I think matters. And later, how the state changes its role towards higher education, but how it is being active in education, primary, secondary, and higher education. Much the same can be repeated for South Korea. South Korea is, South Korean case is nothing but a condensed model of the Japanese case. In terms of time, they just compressed it, but they followed the Japanese model ditto. So I think it has got a lot of lessons for us. And Chinese have picked up a lot of issues from there, and probably we are a little behind. But so, when the state is washing its hands of education, investing in education, I think that is something which simply doesn't go well. There are a whole lot of other issues which are going on. So, this is something we are quite familiar with when we talk about the demographic. So, I think I don't have to go into details. You have the demographic transition basically because your infant and maternal mortality rates are falling in a developed country. And so you find that the fertility rate automatically drops, the family size becomes small, and people try to invest more and more in their children, right? And during this time, you find that the share of the youth in the population starts rising. So you have a bulge, the demographic bulge. Now this bulge, the important thing about this, that is the dividend. This bulge is important because this is an active population. Economically active population is going to contribute in a number of ways. Okay? And this is going to there will be what is called as a low dependency ratio during this time when the younger age population is larger. Okay, it will be contributing economically in a number of ways. I'm not going to get into details of that. Now, the most important thing about this, now we know that we are having this phase. We are going through the demographic dividend phase. China is also going through. Maybe the Chinese advantage is not going to last beyond, let's say, 15 to 20 years. Ours might be there till about 2035 or so, 30 to 35. So the important point is that there is much to be gained during this, when the bulge is there. The second most important thing to keep in mind is that this is time bomb. It's not going to be there forever. So if you're going to make it, you're going to really exploit this. And for this, the basic requirement is creation of human capital or investments in higher education. So this time bomb. And obviously it's not automatic. So the creation of an enabling environment for this is the most important thing that the state has to look at. So I'll just raise some points on those. So what is it that we should be concerned with? Is it raising the GR, the investments, the four sectors that I talked about? Is it that? Or put the role of universities? I won't get into details now. The time factor is important, as I pointed out. One thing that has been pushed into the background is the public good nature of higher education. You know, you talk about externalities. Externality is nothing but something positive coming out of, let's say you're investing in a defined space, something, so that benefits the investor. If the benefits go not only to the investor, but to people outside of the defined space, that is an externality. Because others outside of the defined space have not invested, but they are benefiting. Okay? Now, higher education has got huge externalities. So it becomes a duty of the state to invest in it. Now, the public good nature of higher education, we have had lots of discussions in the last decade or so, how whether it is higher education is merit good, quasi-merit good, etc. etc. All these have been confusing issues conveniently used by the state to withdraw from investing in higher education. So, the winning league, I think I will skip that report. The gathering storm report is for me quite important. 2005, you had a huge soul searching going on in the USA when they raised questions about how Americans' predominance in technology being challenged by others and how America is going to slip. It's no more going to be that's a major national concern in US. There was a huge, there was a large committee of very high-powered people which was created to find solutions. 2005 it was created, 2007 they come out with a report. And that report was called as the gathering storm. So there is a storm gathering and it's going to shape the US predominance in the world in terms of technology, etc. The committee came up with 4 solutions. 3 of those solutions have to do with education. And 2 of those solutions had to do with higher education. Okay? But it's available on the net. Anybody can download and read, so I'm not getting into the details. So the importance of this was highlighted greatly. The committee met again in 2010 and there was a gathering storm report 2.0 or whatever, which only reiterated what the committee said first. I'll just throw these 3 quotes. I'll ask you to guess where from the Zakir. The basic point that comes through in these quotes is that the importance of state investing in education. That is the basic point. So I picked up from a specific source. Can you guess which country? Which country? No, you don't know the answer. this is from the gathering storm report. Its advocate is USA, when the same time it is advocating privatization of education to the developing world as the way to go. But when they were concerned about they are slipping in the R&D indexes, global innovation index, etc., they were highlighting, and I can give other portions of the report, where they were highlighting and pointing out how it is the duty of the state to invest in higher education because the externalities are so high. So the state is duty bound to do that. In USA, they want it to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very cooperative, and I'm sure people will be really motivated to read the whole paper where a lot of this is set out. Now I come to Aishna. Go ahead. Yeah. Would you like to say something? Okay, put up your hand if you don't hear that.
This paper basically talks about the state of higher education system in India post-liberalization era after 1990s. So it traces the policy documents and the regulations which came up after 1990s. And in all the policy documents, there are majorly two objectives which they talk about. That is access and quality. Every policy document would talk about having quality higher education or ensuring access. But the way these policies have developed, or the way that Indian policymakers have the way they have chosen to address these objectives runs very contrary to these very objectives, that is achieving quality and access. So basically we can divide the phase post 1990s into two. So the first could be before late 2000s, that is before 2019, and the second is post 2019 period. So before 2019, what happened was the policy reforms were largely constrained or restricted to reforming public universities. So the policy recommendations were focused on having endogenous privatization. Now, what is endogenous privatization? It is bringing in the principles of private sector or the practices of a private sector in public universities. So, starting from Pune committee, they suggested a mix of input-based funding, the way which we have right now, like planned funds that we have, along with student funding. That students should be provided with vouchers, and they should fund their education on their own, because it was believed that state funding led to wastage and inefficiency. And at the same time, we had this NAC come up in 1994, which wanted universities to have some performance, performance indicators, like
Full form.
National Accreditation Assessment Council. Then in 2000 we had Birla Ambani report, which also suggested private participation in Indian higher education, and CAPE committee, that is Central Advisory Board of Education, in 2004-05. It suggested financial autonomy to raise and that universities should introduce job-oriented courses, and they should look for alternative sources of funding, particularly through industry-wide institutions. And they had also suggested having IQAC, internal quality assessment cell, in the universities to assess the performance of faculty. Then similarly in the 10th five-year plan, that they also suggested increased participation of private sector in the management of colleges. So, and in the second phase, what happened was we faced exogenous privatization, which is opening the services of public service, which is education, to the private sector. And as a result, we had a lot of new private universities coming up during this phase. So in 2009-10, we had only 14. 2007-8, we had only 14 private universities, and now we have over 280 private universities in our country. So, apart from that,
Somewhere like 600, including the small institutes.
yeah, this I'm talking of state private universities, not institutes. And then The 11th five-year plan also talked about financial autonomy by raising tuition fees. 12th five-year plan talked about having public-private participation. Then National Knowledge Commission talked of funding through private participation, basically through industries and other collaboration. And 12th five-year plan also talked about raising the fee structure. That is to revise the fee structure after every 3 years. And that there should be a voucher system introduced. Then it was also during this period that we had performance-based assessment system come up in universities, whereby the performance of faculty was assessed on the basis of three broad criteria, that is research, teaching and extension activities. This was again a kind of new public management technique where the instruments of like output monitoring are introduced in the public universities. On the same lines, then we have ranking now, National Institutional Ranking Framework, which came up in 2016. And more recently, the policymakers have introduced this graded autonomy of universities, where those universities who are doing really good, they would be provided with autonomy. And also we have a new regulation on the institutions of eminence. So the government will select 20 institutes, 10 private and 10 public institutes, universities, who would be given the status of institution of eminence. Earlier it was called as world-class university regulation, but they later changed it to institution of eminence. Possibly, maybe they realized that we can't really have world-class institution in India. So all these things have a lot of implications for access. Like all the policies, time and again they talked of increasing the fees. So increasing the fees will lead to limited access of higher education to students. Also at the same time, in some of the policy documents, they have suggested that students should go for education loan. But then education loan also has its own negatives. For example, particularly those students who are from poor background, they cannot really have an access. First, they suffer from information asymmetry. Second, for the courses which charge very high fees, they can't really go for education loans because a lot of banks, they ask for collateral. If the amount of the fees increases beyond a stipulated level, then they would ask for collateral. And the policy also talked about credit-based system, choice system. So, whereby the students can actually move to any other universities, they can take up any other course, but again then there is a problem of information asymmetry because they do not know about the quality of that course. So education is an experience good, higher education is an experience good. Until and unless we are pursuing that course, we cannot really know about the quality of that book. Yes, we can know through brochures and other things, but that's only a partial information, not complete information. Then regarding the quality, there has been a proliferation of private institutes that we know. And also we know that most of us would know that they recruit low-paid faculty, and the quality in that case cannot really be guaranteed. Then in case of performance-based assessment system, we know after PBAS has come up, we have a lot of predatory journals. So predatory journals where, the fake journals. Like there's a journal from say Bearsarai and they would say, Bearsarai International Journal, so you can publish here. So if you publish in an international journal, you score more. And also there was this journal, I am forgetting the name of it, so they had come up with the first issue. And they had an impact factor of 4. So these kind of things are coming up. So right now I'm doing my PhD on this area only, and I spoke to faculty from 2 state universities. So I raised this issue and I asked them if faculty are being rational if they are publishing in such journals. And more than 95% of the faculty I interviewed in 2 state universities, they said yes, it is rational. What can we do? In a stipulated period of time, we have to accumulate scores. So we have no other option to publish just anywhere. Then also the nature of research, because in a limited time you have to get scores. So the nature of research also gets affected. It's more of an applied or repetitive research rather than doing something new. Then when it comes to ranking, again it is a research which is always given more weightage. And when we are talking of world-class universities, so world-classness, it depends a lot on the reputation first of all, and the UGC regulation also invites new private universities. So if they have all the infrastructure and all the eligibility criteria in place, they can apply for institution of eminence, which was earlier world-class universities regulation. But then reputation is a very important ingredient of it. So one cannot really ascertain even after having, even after they are given that status of universities of eminence, would they really be of world-class status? So that is another issue. And then another most important thing for a university to be of world-class nature is having academic freedom. And given the cut in the funds and how the nature of work would get oriented to more applied kind of a work, and the time crunch that faculty are facing because they have to register output in a stipulated time period, so it's one cannot really say that they would really be able to enjoy the academic freedom, and therefore it's questionable whether we would be able to have that world-class status in our universities. Yeah, so these are some of the issues which I raised in the chapter. I added these world-class university things and all those now because the paper was later, I think 2015.
Right. Good. Thank you very much to all the speakers. She's definitely touched on some of the sensitive issues for teachers and teachers and students are having to live with and come to terms with. So the floor is now open for comments and questions. I think because you've dealt only with India, which hasn't done very well in the global system of grading, we're left with wondering how the Chinese have managed it, or whether the same tricks apply in getting accreditation, if you like, whatever. Now, open to the floor. Yes. Sorry.
No. That's all right.
Yes, go ahead.
So you showed in a graph that the Koreans followed the Japanese model and they are quite ahead. They compress the model in that time factor and they are very ahead as well. So is there anything which India can take from that and implement in our scenario? Is there any takeaways from that model, or is it the best model?
I don't know whether that's the best model, but the easy takeaways are that investments in education is an absolute must. We talked about 6% GNP investments in education. For the last 50-60 years we are talking. We never did that. See, the Koreans, if you look at the investments of the Koreans in the 1950s in education, primary, secondary, tertiary, etc., they went in that order only. Okay. And if you look at the investments that we were making in primary, secondary, tertiary at that time, the distribution was quite skewed in the case of India. It was tilted in favor of higher education for a number of political economic factors. See, there were considerations. The Koreans were absolutely clear. They said equitable access to education, and education was available to everybody. No discrimination on the basis of clan or sex or rural, urban, anything. We just simply cannot say the same thing in the case of India. So, equal access plus heavy investments in education. And they started with primary education. They said that higher education can wait. See, it is just the triangle, education triangle that we talk about. The base has to be enlarged first. Once you enlarge the base, the second level is going to be much more. Okay, primary, secondary, tertiary. Okay, if you don't enlarge the base and keep on investing in we didn't invest much in secondary, tertiary, disproportionately. You can't, the access is denied to a large share of the population. If we had followed the Korean model I'm sure we'll have at least 100 TCS today.
Okay, perfect.
You were talking about opening up of many universities, the private sector, state universities, and etc. Now we know so many universities and so many higher institutions have opened up, especially in engineering and some other subjects also. But the condition of many of them is abysmal. Many of them have closed down because there was no students were coming, and the reason no students were coming, or very few students were coming to those was because of the totally inadequate infrastructure. Some universities or so-called universities had only 2 rooms or 3 rooms, and they publicized
You can
it.
have that.
Pardon?
Some you can have that.
Okay. Now, so just opening up of new institutions of higher education do not solve the problem at all, especially in some of the subjects, management and engineering. This is now, I think it is realized very well these days. Another point which when we were before the lecture started, I was talking to you, is what are the contents of the education. The contents don't mean just physics or history or mathematics. We should also be talking about what is affecting the environment. The environment is totally damaged all over the world, especially in Africa, especially in China, some parts of China and in India. Do we talk anything about environment in our studies? And what causes a bad environment? What causes degradation of the environment? We call, even 2 days back, 3 days back, there have been instances of Tuticorin in Tamil Nadu. Some people were killed. Why were they killed? Or why were people protesting? They were protesting because their whole lifestyle has been, shattered. So these are some of the issues which we should be talking of, in higher education. Not only higher education, even in, school education. So this is a point which I thought I should share with you. I feel terribly concerned. I work in the area of environment, and also, I look at these things. Tuticorin is an example. Similarly, what is happening in Orissa, parts of Andhra Pradesh, parts of Madhya Pradesh, where the tribal people are being totally displaced. We are not considering what is happening. Anyway, I thought I'll say this.
Well, it's good. Yes, all right. Go ahead. Comment on that. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, 2 points, basically, auxiliary questions in terms of the study which has been carried out here, comparing the Chinese and the Indian system. In a way, it amounts to comparing apples and oranges. And what can the apple learn from the orange, or the fish learn from the apple? The point is that given the fact that systems are different, to what extent we can...
Yogi,
Yes.
your voice is projected
Yeah,
there.
yes.
Send it down.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I look this way.
The apples and oranges.
Yeah.
China and India.
So what I'm saying is that China and India, they actually represent 2 different systems.
Yeah.
And therefore, when we compare the respective education systems, I think we still need to see as to what are the practical takeaways we can have from the experience, which will benefit us. I mean, that really is basically how I look at it. And of course, we have one advantage over the Chinese. I mean, we talk about globalization, which is movement of people. But even today under Xi Jinping, and even before, there's no movement of ideas. If you think in an academic sense, so in the sense of higher education, higher academic or research work. So that is the advantage that we certainly have. On the Indian side, I find that our higher education is, in a way, is actually has the same malaise which civilization as a whole has actually has in India. That is that our regulatory network system is very poor. For example, the question that you have a 2-room university. How can a university be a university and called as such and be advertised and publicized such, invite and generate money from the students' fees? when just has two rooms, no infrastructure. So obviously there is a political business nexus in this. A lot of politicians actually start this as a business activity. So unless there is a kind of an independent system of certification of the quality either of the universities or of the journal that you talked about, this journal, whatever, international journal. So unless we actually lay down those norms and you have an independent system, maybe the international system. I mean, OECD perhaps can set up a system where you can actually see as to whether the universities claim to be what they actually are. Are actually what they claim to be.
Yes.
So my point actually is twofold really. One is that are we making the best use of the money? I mean, in macro terms, it's fine to say we are 2% and somebody is 4% or 5%, whatever. The point is, our 2%, is it being put to the use as it's meant to be used, and if not, why not? I think that really is a structural and a critical issue. Number two, if this private universities have said that if they are actually just a money-making business, and if there are no penalties on the people who are actually defrauding the public and the students and all the rest of them, on them because of the fact that you have this kind of nexus developed, in that case, whatever you try, it's not going to succeed. So we have an advantage over the Chinese because they said we have a freer intellectual environment. So in terms of ideas, they're much more open. Xi Jinping's biggest headache is to control ideas. I mean, maybe very good artificial intelligence, but not very good in developing a political system in this country. So what I'm saying is that, as an exercise, what takeaways that we can actually get out?
Any comments on
No, I
the speakers?
agree with you, but the only thing I want to say is that it's not that each and every private university is.
No, there is.
I'm talking about the phenomenon.
Yeah, about
Phenomenon.
10% of them are good standard universities, others are not.
I'm just talking about phenomenon. Why is it that the people
You're
who
right.
claim to be in education, why are they not accountable? And if the accountability system is flawed, I mean, that's what we should pay attention to. I mean, you have seed companies, they certify the quality of seeds. Why can't you certify a good university?
There are mechanisms, and of
But the
course,
office not working.
obviously not, and medical education was the one that was really did count. But Vinod, come in, please come in.
No, I have a series of questions rather than comments.
Yeah, go ahead.
First one, my comment.
Answer.
Can I just take a minute?
Yes, please,
Yes.
please.
Since you have a series, I'd like first.
Including to you.
Yes. Go.
Suitably scaled.
Yeah.
Two minor points. You see, the 2%, 3%.
No, louder.
2%, 3% here. That counts. Why are we bothered about 2% or 3%? Why are we comparing? That counts. We came to that 6% figure just it wasn't produced out of the air. Whole calculations have gone into. And economists have been pointing out 6%.
On purchasing power parity basis, the figures are the percentage.
It doesn't matter. 6% of GNP is what I'm saying. Whether you are using official figures,
Right.
PPP, it doesn't count. Okay, so this 6% has been arrived at after much thought, much academic exercises. So that counts. So that gives you a time frame. If you're investing 6% based on the study of economic histories of other countries, we know that we can reach a particular level. So otherwise, you keep creating slogans. You say that zero illiteracy by 1990, then you push it to 1995, 2000, etc., etc. It keeps moving forward. So there is some basis for these figures. It's a minor. Second is, what are the takeaways? And there are a huge number of takeaways if you look for them. Way back in 1995, I happened to be in Japan. I was giving a public lecture. One of the government officials was asking, we hear that so many Indian IT engineers have migrated, and that was big news, 1990s. So nobody ever thought that So what is the policy to bring them back? He was raising it in 1995, 96. Okay. Now, when we discuss further, I found out that in that particular region, Chiba region, which is close to Tokyo, a large number of Japanese IT professionals have migrated, and the mayor and the local officials were very worried that it's a huge human capital loss. How can we entice them and bring them back? Right. The same issue is concerning, it concerns the Chinese today. I don't know whether it's mentioned here, but just 1 or 2 days back I read, the rate of return of the Chinese students who had gone for higher education, probably in engineering to US, was about 37%. China has introduced policies and it has enticed them, and the figure today is 80%. It is 80% today in a particular sector. Okay, they're able to get back this high level human capital. So how are they managing that? The Japanese are worried, the Chinese are worried. They've been able to achieve something. Maybe we can learn. Maybe some more
That has
studies.
to be state driven to create the conditions for
Whatever it
them
is,
to come
whatever.
Yes.
If you get to know the mechanism,
Yeah.
it might. So what I'm saying is that this sort of an exercise is not just an academic exercise. There can be practical takeaways.
And the other side, sorry.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, yes, go
So,
ahead.
yes, the regulation is indeed poor.
Regulators.
Yeah, there is an excess. This may sound a bit utopian, but I really feel that, the faculty in particular, if they are accountable to themselves, they would not really indulge in all these practices. And
Come again?
yeah, there is a rat race. But then
If the
when I spoke
faculty
to
is-
faculty, on field, a lot of them chose to be out of this rat race. They would say, we would not do this. Because my profession is, it's a pious, and they would find it something very ethical. So they would not indulge in those things. Another thing is, if we look at our country, I don't know, I don't have that data with me, but somewhere I feel that teaching is a backup plan for a lot many people, because something did not happen, so they get into teaching.
Yes.
So, yeah, exactly. So when that happens, then your motivation also gets affected. Yeah,
Good for ladies, because they can take care of the children.
Yeah. So that, in fact, I spoke to one professor in one of the universities, so that's what she said, I like teaching because I can manage my family.
Yeah.
So, so that passion is not there, that motivation is not there. Those things can also make people indulge in such activities.
Now, Vinod, you were waiting, come.
No, actually,
With several points. So, Vinod is very...
some of the questions related to papers presented or chapters by others covered by Sreemati, but these must have risen during the conference and
Yeah.
so on. One, and this is what relates and also footnote to what my friend Yogi was saying. Now, Professor Dr. whatever Yangre, pessimistic that here, we are going to hit the ceiling because there is no academic freedom.
Yeah.
But you have academic freedom in India.
Yes.
And why are we then, the question,
Yes.
did it arise in the course of the
In the
conference?
course of the conference, there was a little heated debate between him and this professor who had come from Sun University. Jackson, yeah. Because this one is from, Yangri is from Hong Kong. And Jack Chan, he said, no, that's not true, there is enough academic freedom. And there was some, I don't remember petition.
Yeah.
And then this Professor Yangri said, you may be a member of the Chinese Communist Party, therefore you say
Oh
so.
yeah, you are.
So,
No, but the point which is worth considering,
Yes.
which is, you would call sort of once again Yogi passed it off at great speed, but I think there's a worth considering. Whether in a whole range of subjects, it does not matter. The state control is irrelevant.
science.
Like we were talking about artificial intelligence,
Science.
yes, a whole field. Though people have said that innovation in science of a higher order, is in fact does require freedom, etc., etc. And yet there may be a whole range of things which affect human life, which the state control is not such a relevant factor. And naturally for social sciences it is a relevant factor. But I just wanted to know to what extent, and you have just pointed out to me that there was a heated debate between two Chinese professors. Two, the interesting paper on human rights.
Human rights law, sir. International human rights law.
Human rights
Law.
Yes. Who attended this course?
Students of Beijing University, regular Bombay students who are studying international relations and other subjects. So they were attending this and
Did the quote, in fact, the moment the word was mentioned, there was a gentle smile from Patricia. Question. So did they really cover sensitive areas? And
No,
did
that's it.
that was the limitation of the course.
Right.
Because the Chinese government vetted the course well before they allowed it to be taught. But the thing is that this bit of human rights consciousness has resulted as and it can be called the baby steps.
Chinese have been for years talking that they have a different definition.
definition.
Chinese never said, they will never deny. Ours is a real human rights, and this goes back to Mao's time already, not to this.
And international law is for other countries. International law is for other countries.
No, in terms of what really matters, in terms of the human's essential thing, look what we have done. What we have done in terms of poverty, what we have done in terms of essential things, etc. Then, Aishna ji, and this also is related to some extent to this question of quality, to a great extent to the question of quality. Some institutions have been, or universities have been granted the status of eminence.
Yes, yes. 10 public, 10 private, which I think is disgraceful. They should, all 20 should be public universities.
10 and 1.
Or leave it open.
Anyhow, go ahead. Opinion should be kept to myself. Yeah.
Once an institution is granted this great title, what is it entitled them to?
100 crores each.
Huge amount of grants.
Yes.
Huge amount of
Money.
huge amount of money.
How much? 100 crores each?
So, I just now want to relate it to next stage. You were very concerned about how to measure quality, and one of the criteria, namely performance, and performance, whether in terms of research papers, etc., are the people cheap. You are suggesting because the nature of the situation to which they are put compels them to cheat. In such short notice, produce this paper, said this, etc. What can be done? What is
Okay, sir. Tell us what can be done.
What has to be done?
my final?
Yes, final question. Comment.
Is there a study of, we were talking about several of the private institutions are indeed good. Not all. I would say MIT has done fairly well. It may have been set up with the worst commercial sort of objectives, but the quality is. Your concern, was that with rising fees, excess problems arise. Is there a sort of a record whether these very institutions have a better record of giving scholarships, fees, etc.?
Yeah, these do. Like I know about Shiv Nagar, they do give scholarships.
Very few.
Yeah, it's not.
Whatever money they earn from that, they give 5 or 10%.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Just a couple of points. One just this issue of whether nature of Chinese political system will severely constrain China's progress towards an innovation nation, which is very major priorities of Xi Jinping. He's talking about that you can't build a structure on borrowed foundations. So technology has a very major preoccupation. Here I would just like to point out that China has historically been an innovating society. China has never been an open society. The two have somehow managed to coexist. Looking ahead again, I think it's better for us not to start with this assumption that given nature of Chinese polity, it will find it difficult to move towards high level innovation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's really backed up by evidence, but this is one issue one needs to know, discuss in much greater detail. I just wanted to know, bring out the historical context in which China has remained a major innovative society.
Yes.
That's one. Second point I wanted to know with reference to Prof. Balatchandirane's point that the empirical evidence suggests that 30% GER is one of the enabling conditions for emergences as an advanced nation. It's true. Both in fact India and China have made good progress. India also a track record in terms of doubling of GER within a very short period of time is quite impressive. China has crossed 30% threshold. But expansion of higher education has created its own problems and very serious problems. If you look at the numbers in China, in 1998, only 1 million people entered university every year.
Yeah.
98 was an important year because higher education was taken as an important element, the stimulus package which was offered post-Asian financial crisis. So the massive investment in higher education was made after 97-98 Asian financial crisis. From 98 to 2000, the number jumped from 1 million to 2 million, doubling in 3 years. From 2000 to 2016, it jumped 7 times. It was 7 million in 2016. But the downside is something like this. Historically, education was seen as a major enabler for upward mobility in Chinese society. Now, in fact, higher education is being degraded. If you look at the numbers there, 2012 survey suggests that the average compensation package which a college graduate commanded was less than a blue collar migrant worker. This is the this is a dramatic shift which has taken place in the last 20 years or so. So same problem in India also. Look at engineering degree, it doesn't command employability or BA, MA. It's not just quality, it's numbers. The numbers have increased so much. Unemployment rate is the highest among the college graduates. College graduates to China is much less, in fact, for those who are just the high school, not even high school, semi-skilled, they are not unemployed, they are much later. So you have this problem where because of expansion, so there is a downside to this progress towards 30%. Because expansion has led to unemployability, expansion has led to a basic, earlier cow passing in college entrance examination was seen as ticket to
Good life.
good life. That's no longer the case. It's a change. Within last 15 years, it has changed dramatically. I wanted to know, have comments that how they are trying to address this issue. Because
Still families are still very desperate for
No, but something else is happening. A huge number of people traveling abroad for higher education.
Yes.
Because that is still seen as ticket to better life.
Yes.
As compared to higher education back in China. So I just wanted to have comment on how this
is the case
I
in
really
India
don't
too.
know how to put it, but in a society which is used to a particular pace of movement over, let's say, decades and centuries, you are introducing something new at a very rapid pace. That's going to upset a whole lot of things. Okay? If you look at higher education expansion, there are quite a number of writings of Tilak and Bhavana Agarwal and others who point out there is a higher education explosion in the developing world. In such a short span of time, so many people have entered the higher education sector. Some figures, you are talking about 1 million, 2 million, etc. The figures for 2020 is that China would have 37 million registered in higher education, 37 million.
And 7 million, I was talking about one
Entrance.
single year, new entrants in higher education.
I guess
This is cumulative number.
I don't think so. 37, no.
Cumulative at point of time.
At that point, cumulative means having the past also. At point of time, 27 million in the case of China, it's going to be 28 million in the case of India by 2020. These are the projections. Now, if you go back and see what the number of students who are enrolled in, let's say, about 30-40 years back and compare with this, it's the society has to adjust to this. So, once again, Tilak has written in detail about this. The inequalities, because of the rapid expansion of the education system, which has come about in China, is far greater compared to India. That clearly points out that. But you have to have access to, you have to open up the access. When you're talking about overall economic inequality in the society, there are only two ways you can correct. Either you correct the wealth inequality, you have to correct the wealth inequality among the masses, as well as the income inequality. Wealth inequality cannot be corrected. Okay? Income inequality you correct through giving equal access to education to everybody.
No, I'm not challenging, I'm saying that new distortions have come.
Yeah, obviously.
See,
that is because the basic reason for that is, I think we were discussing something like that. The basic reason is that if you look at some of the world-class universities, they developed over centuries. The government of India would like to have a world-class university tomorrow. It's impossible. You're asking for the impossible, right? We are trying to achieve what the Japanese achieved, or the Koreans achieved by investments over decades. We want it within 2-3 years. How is that possible?
However, the
So
Chinese
the existing inequalities are going to get worsened. And the cost of private education is so high, so it's going to even worsen the situation. So we can look at
rural divide has worsened as a result of access to higher education opportunities. If you are carrying an urban hukou in Beijing, for instance, compared to rural hukou in Yunnan, for instance, I mean the difference is something like 1:200, 1:300. It's a huge gap which is there. Because the reservation in Beijing University, if you are Beijing hukou, much greater chance of getting that than you are coming from an outside province, especially to rural area.
The question, sorry, because we were all talking, Patricia's question which you have almost asked, as to how did if you say, centuries, yes, I went to one of those centuries in Oxford and all that kind of stuff, but how did the Chinese, this is the question you were raising, no? How did they got all these world-class universities? Tsinghua and company?
See, the university which got the highest ranking and got into the 200 or 250th rank in India, do you know the name of the university? The one
Facebook.
It is from Punjab Agricultural University. It is simple documentation work. We are doing the NAC exercise in Delhi University right now, and it's amazing amount of clerical work. Okay, so I also let me complete. Please understand. Things can be worked. My API score can shoot up to a few hundreds. I can publish in all the internet journals. Every one of them has got an impact factor of whatever, and for everyone I get 5 to 10 points. And if the word international journal is there, 5 points becomes 15 points according to UGC. So things can be worked. Punjab Agricultural University was the first one to enter into the 200th or 250th great university in Asia, whatever.
What's the objective? That's all.
So you see, it's just a documentation.
What you're saying is that they very tough.
Several other people wanting to Shobri.
Yes, higher education.
My question is certainly very nice and away from all these and less technical and meant for everybody. When we started learning Chinese way back in '82, we saw the kind of students who were going to China for some kind of education. We also saw what kind of people were coming to India for education, and that has over a period of time completely changed. From scholarships to Tsufe, the disciplines have gone out of just China studies and India studies, gone into social science subjects and all that. And today we also see very young faculties are teaching in each other's country. I
Yeah.
mean, there's Tang Wen-chen teaching in Jindal,
Yeah.
and then we have Rajiv Ranjan teaching in Shanghai, and there are, I'm sure, many more such cases. And these are emerging cases, and there will be more. So my question is, are we kind of looking at some kind of a synergy between the two countries in the area of education in future? I was at the Ambedkar University the other day for a meeting in the Global Studies department. So, this Global South and Global North and all that discourse that is going on. So, do we see education as one of those areas where the Asian giants are creating a synergy to contest?
And when it comes to talk about people-to-people relations, education is one of the important things here. And gradually, as the Chinese, learn English, more and more Chinese students now know English, say compared to what it was 10 years back. They are wanting faculty from other countries, and Indians going to China, you see, to be very honest, it's much more cheaper to have an Indian teach than an American or an Australian or a British.
That is synergy.
Here the demand for China studies and Chinese language is also increasing, and therefore we are getting.
No, but you see, Tang Wen-chen is not teaching Chinese language.
No, he's teaching.
No, I'm saying these kind of
Right.
scholars are increasing in each other's country. And so there is a, anyway, something on the table for.
I don't know whether, I think one has to, it will take quite a bit of time before. See, I was involved in one, the Japanese were keen on what they call as kokusaika, internationalization, so education field also. So they had worked out with the World Bank, and there was a scheme under which in a major Japanese national university, scholars from the developing world can come, and the teaching would be done in English. I was also involved in it. I was involved in the economic side of things. So that sort of a thing, I think, might work in the sense that there are a number of multilateral agencies which pick up a specific theme. For us, it was training for developing countries' economies in some particular financial aspect, etc. So under that, World Bank is spending money, and it is invited. So it was Japan. The same thing they could do with China, etc. That way, I think the scholars' movement might increase more and more. That is one. The second thing is, it is fashionable for any university worth its salt in China and Japan to show how much of international faculty visits them.
Yeah.
So under that, I think it's
Yeah.
more.
Yes, they get more funds when they have it.
Now, a question down the back there. Yeah.
My name is Zafar, and one thing I could hear in this poem is one thing positive thing with Chinese is that they have developed whole curricula in Chinese language, whether it is in engineering or medical. And here we have Hindi versus English. Up to +2 level, we have a lot of students from Hindi background, and we don't have Hindi in graduation. And second thing I want to ask that in India we have a lot of discussion about that one university having a lot of colleges. Like a university in Varanasi has about 100 colleges in around 200 kilometers. And managing is very hard compared to what I have seen in Taiwan, that they have more universities, less colleges. So what about China? And my last question is, how ideology inspire Chinese to learn more or to get more education in terms of Confucius ideology or maybe communist ideology, which we don't have here in India?
The second question about universities having
More
colleges,
colleges.
that's part of the British education system which we have inherited. The Chinese have inherited the American system, where every university is an enlarged college, and they have many specialized universities. Universities for railways, universities for post and telegraph, university for computer engineering. We don't have anything. We have mostly comprehensive universities, right, with consequent colleges. So our basic structures in the two countries are different. That's the reason. Okay, now about ideology, see, Communist Party of China has always encouraged education from its earliest, days. I don't know if you remember, in class, you were my student, I may have mentioned this, that in 1921 when the party came into existence, the first two units that they formed was education wing and a women's wing, right? Okay, and education has always been given a lot of stress, and because you cannot impart communist ideology to anybody who's not educated. You need a certain level of education, not just simple literacy, but education to understand communism. Okay? Plus, ideology is very important, has always been important. In between, its importance had gone down. They have again set up departments of Marxism, Leninism. Now it's compulsory to, do a course in that. But of course, what I hear from students personally, they said they are least interested, but since it's a compulsory course, they have to do.
Now English is compulsory.
English is earlier English was not compulsory. Now English, they have started teaching English from grade 3 in schools, right? Okay, so these changes of course have come, but the impact of ideology will remain there as long as the Communist Party is in power. But how much the common people adhere to this, ideology is a question. Because when you force something down people's throat, always beyond a point people will reject. So what was your first?
Education in mother language.
Oh, okay. Well, the Chinese have the advantage of, having one language there, Han Chinese is spoken all over China, even in minority areas, although on paper they can get their primary education in their local languages, but higher education is all in Chinese. If you don't know Han Chinese, you are at a disadvantage. All the minorities know that, so they all learn Chinese. Whereas in India's case, it's English versus Hindi. If you don't know English, you cannot really progress. So, and in China, if you don't know Mandarin Chinese, if you don't know Han Chinese, you can't progress. As simple as that.
No, I thought his question was, is innovative thinking easier for a Chinese because he's operating in his own language, whereas the Indian is struggling with a different language structure.
Perhaps it is because, I don't know, I think if everything can be translated into, Hindi or, Indian languages, it can play the same role the Chinese is playing, but we are not even making a good effort. Still there is no good textbook on Chinese history in Hindi. Some publishers have been after me to, you write and we translated it to Hindi. So, we have a shortage of things in the regional languages.
Okay, one final comment from or question from Dean.
I just have a comment and a question with regard to higher education in China, especially when I was in China. I see also because of political economy, we see more Chinese getting into higher education at the same time helping the government because you don't have immediate employment demands.
Yeah.
So you postpone 4 years of the master students into research. So what would be the offshoot of that? The second one is also with regard to, because we see a lot of Chinese going abroad and coming back, as Professor Balatchandirane alluded to. But at the same time, we see when I was interacting with my friends there, a lot of social scientists want to stay back in America or in the West.
Yeah.
Only it's the natural sciences who are given good packages coming back to China. So,
I think the social sciences, they don't want too many Western trained.
They'll come back with all sorts of ideas.
well, that's a comment.
Why are the same matters? Why not the same?
Yeah.
I mean, do Chinese go for social studies?
Economics is one.
It's not a question of how, by their side. I mean, people are now applying on their own.
Political science, international relations.
The government not only doesn't stop, they have the resources to go and send their children to study abroad.
Anyone want to respond to that, or we're
First
all responding
question
together?
With regard to a lot of students being enrolled into with the expansion of higher education, so you have immediate decline of demand and employment.
Yeah.
Because 4 years you have
So they keep on studying.
Yes, they keep on
But
studying.
people say that that's the case here and always has been.
Yeah, in India,
If you
when-
get a job, you would
Yeah,
get paid.
the mismatch will always be there. You see, the labor market and qualification
Or you're waiting to get married.
In India, when higher secondary was,
No, I got something.
earlier it was after 11th class, I didn't come to 11th class. When it was raised to 12 years of physical education, the first comment that came from critics was that this is to, postpone unemployment. When Delhi University was trying to implement FYUP, 4-year undergraduate program, one criticism was that the idea is so that you postpone So probably everybody tries that.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think we'll wind up. This is obviously a very, very fruitful area for comparative study. And
more
this
ideas.
book, for all it's
Can I
done.
just make one small
Yes,
point?
yes, go on.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, this is something that I've gathered from my interactions and personal impressions. Chinese students, especially at the master's level and PhD level, are very, very tense most of the time.
Yeah.
Why? Because, they fear that they will be unemployed, and the expectations of the parents, they're all, single children, is very high. So this fear of unemployment after finishing the studies makes them very tense, and a lot of people are having psychological problems. Universities are having counseling centers
And
for these
loans, do
students.
they have loans also?
No, they have loans. Of course they have loans. But the loan has to be paid back within a specific time. If you don't get a job, how do you pay back the loan? So these tensions, they are
very expensive.
I've asked this to other students, Indian students, and they've said, yes, it's very true. They're all the time very tense. Most of the students, especially the masters and research. Undergrads, they have been nice.
So just to get back to this, the first thing is that what we haven't done is, except touched upon vaguely, is that higher education can't be viewed without looking at the bottom of the pyramid. It's the preschool, the primary, the middle school, the high school. All that is the base for higher education. So that it can't be dealt with in isolation in a comparative way. It follows on. The second thing that came up was a question of the Gaokao, the matriculation, the 12th standard boards. And there was a very interesting article which we circulated in the Google group recently about that there are also ways of getting bonus points. And the bonus points which were if you like, for disprivilege, for rural backgrounds and so on, are now actually favoring the urban hukou residences and people with other forms of cultural and social capital, overwhelming. So, and therefore you have, through this system, our senior Ambassador Kishan Rana, every now and then he says, and what about Gaokao? We don't what about Gaokao? So this particular article tells us a lot about what about Gaokao. And it shows that this is a mechanism for the reproduction of privilege, even if some people go out of university unemployed. And that reminds me of a lot of writing in sociology on particularly the Indian family. Professor Andre Bette has a very good article called Social Reproduction in the Family. And he says Indian middle-class families are interested in upward mobility, and the two mechanisms are, first of all, schooling. I mean, from preschooling, they're already looking to matriculation and employment and all the way up, putting great, even an interview for kindergarten is a headache, And the other mechanism is the right marriage partner. And these are the two mechanisms for social mobility which are in the control of the family. That's always left a very deep impression on me, because and the great emphasis on education for that reason. Now, what troubles me is that maybe it's the old sort of socialist welfare system that one was brought up with, or a system of public education such as what I was brought up with, that is government-run, state education. We always thought private education and boarding schools were a form of punishment for bad children who had to be sent away from home, and that the best education was public education, which is no longer true even in Australia. But as you get the problem brought up in many of these articles is the privatization thing, which is market-driven. And the market-driven has its own priorities. Why should anyone ever study philosophy, or ethics, or social sciences, or history? You have to study things which you believe, quite normally sometimes, that the market actually wants. Now, in the old days, you found all these education committees sitting around saying, what does the nation want? And they might say that the nation wants area studies, like China, the days when Chinese and Japanese and area studies were set up. That was a national project. Or after 1975, they might say we need gender studies. Or like Ravi was just demanding, they might say we want cross-disciplinary environment studies for the present thing. But now, it's not a national responsibility anymore. It's left to the market forces, and the market forces are driven by pragmatism, utilitarianism, opportunism, and other things be damned. So the question that is raised in one paper after another, and in your talk too, is that really, is this a good, is this the way things are going to develop if you leave it so much to the market forces to decide? And the market itself keeps failing. Like you have so many unemployed engineers and so many bad plumbers who can't fix a tap, So then there was a lot of talk about the US investment in higher education and R&D and their lead in innovation, which is still the case. I've often heard it said that the US would never be a leader in science if it weren't for emigre Polish mathematicians. The Manhattan Project would never have happened without emigre Jews and emigre Polish mathematicians. Nor would the computer have been invented, nor the German code cracked during the war, if it weren't for the constant inputs. In this, the Indians in Silicon Valley, as was pointed out, the export of Indian and other third world talent is absolutely crucial in sustaining these. So the US has been a magnet attracting talent from other countries, a lot of which doesn't go back. The only final, two final comments. This business of innovation, which is going to be, along with science, technology, and innovation, the theme of the next All India Conference of China study, is actually a very fraught one. I mean, people from Needham onwards have wondered why, well, always wondered why innovation happens and why it doesn't. I don't know if anyone else knows the name of the person who did this, but I went to a very serious paper given by in one of these conferences actually, given by a Singapore academic, or an Indian academic in Singapore, who said that the Singapore government, which always wants to be one step ahead in trade and commerce and innovation and AI and dialogues between the Koreas also, they had done a study of Silicon Valley. And they said that is near Los Angeles, and in Los Angeles you have a counterculture. And what we in Singapore need is, there are, Los Angeles has artists, it has bohemians, it has gays and lesbians, it has cross-dressers, it has all sorts of queer people, of all transgenders, it has all these things. So if Singapore could, which otherwise is very regulated in the moral sphere, if it could set aside a sort of SEZ for people with gays, lesbians, people who wear brown shoes and don't wear suits, cross-dressers, artists, painters, and all these odd people, if they could have a regulated zone where these people operate, innovation would be sure to come to Singapore, but the rest of the population would not be contaminated.
Or have it offshore.
Or have it offshore, perhaps a little bit. So, on that happy note, that we need little islands of people who don't conform will all become innovative. So, thank you and congratulations so hard, and thank you for the audience on this very hot day and the speakers. A long way to go. This is a really fertile field to go into. Thank you.